The sunset bathed the window frames of the old manor in gold, the house I had once believed to be the safest shelter of my life. I stood in the living room and let the late light pour through the tall panes. Sweeping across the time-worn walls hung with portraits of classical musicians my father had collected. In every corner, his presence still lingered, the scattered piano melodies on rainy evenings, the scent of camphor wood drifting from the old bookcase. All of it was mine now after my father's death, along with the scholarship fund he had left for talented but poor music students. I am Selena Hartley, 32 years old, a voice teacher at the City University of the Arts. I had thought my life was complete, a job that nourished my passion, a house full of family memories, a devoted husband, and a stepmother, Miranda, whom I believed loved me like her own child. Everything seemed as peaceful as a soft lullaby. Damien Cross, my husband, came into my life 4 years ago. He appeared at a charity concert, his eyes bright and his smile the confident curve of a successful businessman. He sat in the front row, listening as I conducted the choir. After the performance, Damien came up to shake my hand. His voice low and warm. "Your music makes people believe in better things." That sentence felled me, a girl who had just lost her mother and lived quietly. In the world of notes, we married quickly. Damien always appeared attentive, preparing breakfast with his own hands, driving me to the university, buying the lavender bouquets I adored. Whenever anxiety crept in, he would whisper, "I'll take care of everything. You only need to teach and sing for me." I believed he was the anchor after so many losses. My stepmother Miranda was gentle too. After my father remarried, I learned to accept her presence. Miranda always cared for the house, tidied up, prepared warm dinners. When my father died, she hugged me for a long time and said, "From now on, we'll only have each other." I trusted her. I trusted them both until that evening. I had just finished teaching and came home as the streetlights cast long shadows on the leaf-strewn driveway. Damien said he had an important meeting. Miranda said she had to meet an old friend. The big house was eerily quiet. Only the ticking of a clock remained. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat in the living room, letting the autumn breeze slip through the crack of the door. The landline rang, the kind hardly ever used these days. I was about to pick it up when I realized the secondary extension in the hallway had been left on. For some reason, I remained silent and pressed my ear closer. Then my heart stopped when I heard a familiar voice. "She trusts completely," Damien said, his tone low and full of self-satisfaction. "Just a few more weeks on the medication and the medical record will be complete. By then, admitting her won't raise any objections." My blood felt as if it froze in my veins. The her he spoke of heat meant me. Another voice replied slowly and gravely, Miranda's voice, "Be careful. The assets from the scholarship fund and this manor are not small. We cannot let Selena become suspicious." The cup of tea slipped from my hand, the amber liquid spreading across the old rug. I clapped a hand to my mouth to stop myself from screaming. What were they talking about? Hospitalization. Medical records. Damien gave a quiet laugh, a sound like a blade cutting into my flesh. "She thinks the pills are for anxiety. In fact, they'll make her hazy, distracted, quick to anger. A few weeks from now, the doctor will have enough evidence to conclude mental disorder, incapacity to manage assets. Then everything will be transferred to us." Miranda said it quietly, but with the neatness of a pair of scissors cutting the last ribbon of trust from my chest. I trembled until my back slid down the wall. The whole world turned into a stage theater. The house, my father's paintings, the piano, all of it was merely a backdrop hiding a play. And I was the naive character placed in a trap. A surge of memories flashed through my mind. Damien always reminding me to take my pills on time. Gentling bringing a glass of water to my bedside. Miranda constantly monitoring my behavior. noting panic attack or forgetfulness, which I had believed were only signs of fatigue. It had all been an arranged performance. I tried to take a deep breath, but my lungs felt strangled. I wanted to run, to shout, but my legs were numb. Only one thought crept in. I was living with predators, and I was their prey. The phone line clicked off, leaving only the long tone. I shook as I lifted the receiver and set it back in its cradle. The house sank into heavy silence. I sat on the floor, hands clutching my head. In the dark, the last words of Damien echoed. Once Selena is admitted, we will have it all. The kitchen where he once made breakfast now resembled a staged crime scene. The goodnight kisses had transformed into daggers. Promises turned into sentences that condemned my faith. That night, I stayed awake. Outside, the wind howled through the garden, but the real storm was inside me. For the first time, I stared hard at the truth. The man I called my husband, the woman I called my mother, were not family. They were accomplices in a scheme to rob my life. And I understood, from this moment on, if I wanted to live, I had to pretend to be weak, to play the victim until I found a chance to strike back. They thought I was a lost doe. But they didn't know within the dark a wolf had just awakened. The next morning, sunlight poured through the bedroom window, honey gold. I lay still, listening to the sparrows chattering in the garden, but the sound no longer brought peace. Beside me, Damien turned over and placed his warm hand on my shoulder. You awake. I'll make you some coffee. His voice was so gentle that, if I hadn't known the truth, I might have smiled and believed that our happiness remained intact. Now, every one of his gestures made me shiver. Damien went down to the kitchen. Leaving behind the familiar trail of his cologne, I sat up. My heart raced as my eyes fixed on the small amber pill bottle on the bedside table. The white label read, Diazoral minus 20 milligrams. The doctor had prescribed it 3 weeks earlier. After the appointment, Damien insisted I attend. I remembered that day I had only complained about insomnia and stress from work. The doctor nodded, wrote a thick prescription, and Damien smiled and thanked him profusely. I shook the bottle. The tablets clinked together like tiny stones. My fingers trembled. I had been taking them for days without the slightest suspicion. No wonder my head often felt heavy, my memories blurred. My rhythm slipped while lecturing, sometimes even forgetting a familiar passage in the middle of a class. I had told myself I was exhausted from my father's death, overwhelmed by work. But now I knew the cause. Damien returned with a wooden tray, 2 cups of coffee, a glass of water, and the morning pill. He set the tray down and smiled kindly. Take your medicine first, then have your coffee. My throat tightened. His eyes watched me with concern, but with control as well. I lifted the tablet to my lips, tipped my head back, and took a sip of water. I let the pill rest under my tongue, bitter, faint, but instead of swallowing, I discreetly kept it there. When Damien turned away to stir his coffee, I coughed lightly, dabbed my mouth with a napkin, and slipped the tablet into the palm of my hand. My heart pounded. If I faltered, he would notice, feeling better. Damien sat down beside me, fingers brushing my hair as a doting husband would. I forced a smile. My voice came out so soft I barely recognized it. Yes, I feel a little less tense. He seemed satisfied and pressed a kiss to my forehead. I nearly cried, not from relief but from revulsion, when he left to change into his office clothes. I quickly went to the bathroom and flushed the pill down the drain. Watching it spiral and disappear in the current felt like escaping a trap. But I also knew, to survive, I had to keep pretending to take my medication each day. In the days that followed, I lived a double life. In front of Damien and Miranda, I would take the pill, swallow it with water, and smile with gratefulness. But when no one was looking, I would vomit it up or secretly tuck it into my pocket. I began to collect the pills in a small tin box I hid deep in the bottom of my wardrobe. They would be the evidence that I was being forced to take medication. Yet the act of pretending was far from easy. Miranda often dropped into my room with an inspecting gaze like a laser. She would ask in her saccharine tone, "Do you feel better?" This medicine is very effective. I had to say, I felt much improved. Even though whenever I avoided the pills, I felt clearer-headed than I had in years. That clarity came with its own torment. I started remembering the times I had zoned out during class, students' pitying looks, colleagues' suspicious glances. I realized that all of it was the result of those drugs. Damien and Miranda were gradually painting a portrait of an unstable woman, and I was the victim they were shaping. One afternoon, I went to the university to finish some tasks. As I stepped into the lecture hall, I heard whispers behind me. Two students murmured, "Professor Hartley seems different lately. One day, she even forgot a basic passage." "Yeah." My mom said she heard Professor Hartley is undergoing psychological treatment. I froze. My chest tightened. The rumor had spread even to the students. That evening, when I came home, Damien feigned worry. "I heard the university might give you some time off to recuperate. Don't be too upset. You need the rest." I saw a flicker of a smile on his lips, one he tried to hide but failed. In that instant, I knew this was all his plan. Night fell, and sleep would not come. I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. The pills in the tin lay quiet like small but weighty pieces of proof. I stroked them as if holding the truth that could save me. I thought of my father. He always told me music never lied. One wrong note and the whole score falls out of harmony. My life had become a score. Someone was deliberately throwing off beat. And I, the conductor, had lost control. But perhaps, as when I stood on the podium, I could still pull the orchestra back into tune. If I had the courage. On the 10th day since I discovered their scheme, Damien brought more pills. I pretended to swallow and then hid the tablet in my palm. This time, Miranda appeared unexpectedly, eyes scanning. "Have you taken it all?" she asked, voice sweet but edged with steel. I nodded and managed an innocent smile. She came over, touched the glass, tipped it to make sure no pill remained. My heart nearly leaped from my mouth, but the pill was safe. Miranda nodded, satisfied, and left. I sank into a chair, cold sweat beading on my skin. Clearly, they did not merely force the pills into me. They monitored every small move. One tiny mistake and everything would be exposed. I realized I had to find a way to get out of this house quickly. Before the script they had set into motion became reality, that night I began to write in a journal habit I had long abandoned. I recorded every event: the day Damien brought the medication, the day Miranda checked the rumors at school, the hazy feeling after taking the pills. I needed my own record, a true timeline to confront the medical record they were fabricating, the white pages filled with ink. When I finally put my pen down, I knew I had just begun a campaign. They thought I was weakening day by day, but they did not know that every pill I kept, every line I wrote, was an arrow being readied for counterattack. In the mirror, I saw my hollowed face. Yet in my eyes, for the first time, a different light glinted. Not suspicion anymore, but resolve. The October wind howled through the university corridor. I walked quickly, clutching the stack of sheet music to my chest. That day, I had no choice but to return to class because of an important performance scheduled by the Department of Vocal Music. Though my heart was tangled with fear, I wanted to prove to everyone that I was still myself, that I was still Professor Selena Hartley, serious, lucid, in control. But the moment I entered the rehearsal room, the atmosphere shifted. Students sat scattered across the benches, their eyes darting toward me before quickly turning away. A few whispers pricked at my ears like needles, I heard she forgets things all the time. Yeah, she even sang off-key the other day. My chest tightened. I drew in a breath, walked to the podium, and forced a smile. Let's begin. Beethoven's Symphony No. 9. The choral section, I raised my hand, baton tapping against the desk. But as the music began, dread ran through Mitha. Score on the stand was not the version I had prepared. The parts were misaligned, the rhythm disjointed. The students' voices stumbled, confused. Some laughed nervously. Others looked at me with pity. I flipped quickly through the pages and discovered the sheets had been swapped with a crude, abridged version missing notes, wrong measures. Someone had done this deliberately? I froze, my hand trembling, my face burning. The room went silent except for my ragged breathing. At last, I lowered the baton and whispered, "Class is dismissed." I left the hall under the weight of silence. Hearing the trailing words behind me, she really has problems. That evening, Damien sat in the living room, leafing through a newspaper, his tone calm. I heard the department has suspended you for a while. They think you need rest. He looked up at me, feigning concern. But at the corner of his mouth lingered the faintest smile. I clenched my fists so tightly that my nails dug into my skin. Who switched my scores? Damien. My voice cracked. He raised an eyebrow. You're imagining things again. Maybe you just forgot. You haven't been well lately. He set down the paper, came to sit beside me, and stroked my hair as though to comfort me. Selena, I only want you to get better. Mother Miranda and I both worry about you. The medicine will help. I forced a stiff smile, struggling to hide the fury boiling inside. In the days that followed, the rumors spread like wildfire. Students avoided my gaze. Colleagues who once confided in me now kept their distance. The department head called me into his office, voice hesitant. Selena, we've received numerous complaints about your condition. Some say you've lost control in class. Others are worried about the student's safety. I think it would be best if you took extended leave for treatment. I sat motionless, numb. So this was it. Damien and Miranda's fabricated medical record was not just pills. They planted whispers. Stage situations made me appear unstable in public. I had become the troubled woman no one wanted to associate with. That night, I came home late. The kitchen lights glowed warmly. Miranda was arranging red roses in a crystal vase. She looked up with her gentle smile. You're home, dear. You look tired. I'm fine, I forced out. She pulled out a chair, gesturing toward a bowl of soup already set. Sit, eat, and take your medicine on time. I sat, spoon in hand. Though my eyes were fixed on the glass of water beside me where the white pill waited. Miranda's gaze followed my every move, sharp and unwavering like a nurse guarding a patient, not a mother watching her child. I pretended to lift the pill to my mouth, swallowed with water, and then smiled faintly. Thank you, Mother. She nodded in satisfaction. You must listen. Damien and I only want what's best for you. The words rang in my ears like an unspoken contract. We do everything for your benefit. But I knew very well the benefit was never mine. Later that night, I went into the garden and sat beneath the bare maple tree. The wind cut cold, but I felt no chill. I opened the tin box, staring at the tablets glinting in the moonlight. Each pill was a piece of evidence, each one an accusation. I whispered to myself, they think I'm weak. But they will never know I am clearer now than ever before. The next morning, an email arrived from the university. Professor Hartley, the institution has decided to suspend your duties for 3 months to allow you to stabilize your health. A replacement will be appointed in the meantime. I stared at the screen, tears welling but refusing to fall. They had succeeded halfway slating me from my work, my students, the world of music, the only thing that kept me upright. Damien entered just then, suited for work. He leaned down and pressed a kiss to my cheek. "You should rest. I'll handle everything." I turned away so he wouldn't see the fire blazing in my eyes. Inside me, a dissonant symphony thunder, the music of defiance. That night, I opened my journal and wrote the final line of the day. "They are isolating me, piece by piece. But in this solitude, I will find strength." When every spectator leaves the hall, that is when the true musician plays her piece, and mine will be a song of retaliation. I closed the book and faced the mirror. The woman there had messy hair and dark circles under her eyes, but her gaze was steady, unyielding. I whispered to her, "Selena, keep pretending to be fragile. When the right day comes, you will rise. And when you do, they will have nowhere to hide." A late autumn downpour lashed the city, droplets splashing across the pavement, breaking into cold pinpricks of light. I sat on the bus, my coat sodden, watching the thick streaks of rain across the window. People jostled, laughed, thumbed their phones. I was silent, feeling like a ghost among the crowd. After the suspension, I had almost nowhere to go. At home, Damien and Miranda shadowed my every move. Outside, everyone regarded me with suspicion. I had to find someone who would believe me, someone independent enough not to be pulled into their web. And the only name that came to mind was Ethan. Ward. Ethan and I went to the same high school. Back then, I was the girl lost in music, and he was the boy who always carried a camera, photographing ordinary moments. I later heard he became an investigative reporter at a major newspaper. We had been out of touch for more than 10 years, but my instinct told me Ethan might be the one person I could cling to. I found his newsroom on a miserable, windy afternoon. The red brick building huddled along a narrow street, the windows fogged with steam. I stood at the door for a long time, hands trembling, heart pounding as if I were about to perform for a large audience. Finally, I breathed in and stepped inside. Ethan sat in a corner, laptop open and piles of files stacked beside him. He had changed from the memory I kept, longer brown hair fallen over his brow, a hardened face, eyes still bright but more guarded than before. When I said his name softly, "Ethan," he looked up, startled. "Selena Hartley." He sprang to his feet. "Good God, how long has it been?" "Over 10 years. I forced a smile. "Yes, it's been a long time." His gaze swept over me and lingered on my hollowed eyes and worn expression. He pulled a chair out. "Sit down." "What's wrong?" "You don't look well." I sat, clutching my handbag tightly. Inside, it lay the tin with the pills I'd been hiding. I hesitated, unsure where to begin. How could I tell someone, almost a stranger, that my husband and stepmother were plotting to send me to a psychiatric hospital and seize everything? Ethan leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Listen, I'm following a few odd land acquisition cases, and Damien Cross's name comes up on a few lists. Are you his wife?" I startled. My heart leaped. "You know Damien?" "Only on paper. He's connected to shady projects, but there's nothing concrete yet." "Why have you come to me?" That was the moment I decided to take the risk. I took out the tin, opened it. The white tablets rolled in my palm. My voice shook as I spoke. "They're poisoning me with these pills. The doctor called them sedatives, but every time I take them, I get foggy, lose time, become irritable. I discovered my husband and stepmother plotting to have me committed so they can take my assets." Ethan stared at the pills, then looked up at me with a mix of skepticism and concern. "Selena, that sounds like something out of a movie. Do you have any other proof?" I fumbled for my phone and played the recording I'd made the night I overheard them. Damien's voice came through clearly. "Just a few more weeks on the meds, and the medical record will be complete. Then admitting her will be easy." Ethan was silent for a long time. I sat holding my breath, afraid he would dismiss me as delusional. Then he exhaled and drummed his fingers on the table. All right. I believe you. At least I believe you're telling me what's happening. But to expose them, we'll need more than this. We need financial records, forged documents, anything that proves Damien is orchestrating this. I choked on my words. I can't do it alone. I'm isolated. Everyone thinks I'm unstable. Ethan looked at me with a determined set to his jaw. You're not alone anymore. That evening, I followed him to a small cafe near the newsroom. Under the warm amber light and the scent of coffee, I told him everything in detail when the pills started. The blank moments, the swapped music score. The university suspension, Miranda's scrutinizing gaze. Each detail felt like a knot loosening in my chest as I spoke it aloud. Ethan listened intently, taking notes. From time to time, he'd look up, and I could see his skepticism give way to sympathy. When I finished, he gave a small nod. Damien has built a wall around you. Rumors, paperwork, the doctor, everything is set to work against you. The more elaborate the scheme, the easier it is to find a crack. I'll help you find those cracks. In that moment, a sliver of light pierced the darkness. Someone believed me. Someone was willing to stand with me. Late that night, I went home. Damien was asleep. Miranda sat in the living room, knitting. She looked up and smiled sweetly. You're back late. Where did you go? I gave a thin smile, palms numb. Just walked to clear my head. Miranda nodded, a look of calculating warmth in her eyes. I climbed the stairs, heart pounding. In my room, I closed the door and leaned against the cold wood. On the desk, the little tin sat, the pills glinting under the lamp like dead notes. I whispered to myself, the game has only just begun. In the days that followed, I lived a double life. In front of Damien and Miranda, I remained the dutiful wife, accepting the morning glass of water and the tablet with a grateful smile, nodding obediently when they urged me to rest. But behind their backs, I slipped pills into a tin, continued writing in my journal, and met Ethan whenever I could. We usually chose a small cafe at the end of the street where few people paid attention. Ethan carried an old recorder and his camera, looking every bit the reporter at work. I told him every detail, every suspicious sign. He listened and then began to plan. We need indisputable proof. Audio is good, but for a court to believe it, we'll need paperwork, transactions. Anything that shows Damien is forging or diverting funds. I nodded, my hands clutching my coffee cup until the ceramic burned. But how can I get access? He locks everything down, and Miranda watches me all the time. Ethan went quiet, eyes distant. We'll start with what he can't hide, habits. The first move was to plant a recorder in the house. One evening while Damien was in the shower, I eased open a drawer in his study. Stacks of files sat neatly inside, but the electronic lock glowed red. I couldn't open it. My heart hammered. The sound of water thudded from the bathroom. In a flash, I slipped the tiny recorder Ethan had given me into a crack behind the bookshelf, positioned near his desk. I closed the drawer and left as if I'd touched nothing. The next day, pretending to read in the living room, I heard Damien on the phone in his study. His voice low, transfer more before the weekend. My wife suspects nothing. The medical record will be complete soon. Dr. Whitaker has agreed to sign. Once she lacks legal capacity, the authority will be mine. I sat frozen. Each word struck like a knife. The evidence was there, but I had to be patient. A week later, Ethan came with a memory card from the recorder. He played it, and we listened together to Damien discussing a custodial account and authorization for transfers. Miranda's voice slithered in, cold. Make sure that when she's taken away, the press will think it's for health reasons, not for money. Ethan frowned. This is an important piece, but not enough. We need the financial trail. I'll try to approach the bank. The bank, the place where my father had opened the scholarship fund. The place Damien had been frequenting lately. I remembered the way a bank clerk had looked at me last time, pity and caution. Damien must have seeded rumors even there. "Will they show you the records?" I asked, panicked. Ethan gave a half-smile. "Trust me. I have ways." That day he returned with a printed dossier from an inside source. The numbers on the pages made my throat tighten. Transfers made regularly small sums at first, escalating to tens of thousands, and finally a six-figure sum. All of them bore my name and an electronic signature I had never made. "Here it is," Ethan said, his eyes bright. "Forged signatures. And the beneficiary accounts all lead back to shell companies Damien set up. If we get a few more documents, we can charge him with fraud." I gripped the edge of the table until my knuckles blanched, tears springing to my eyes. "Do you understand, Ethan? He's not only stealing money, he's turning me into a madwoman, so when I resist, no one will believe me." Ethan placed his hand over mine, solid and warm. "I believe you, and I'll make others believe you too." But not every move went smoothly. One evening, just after I had slipped the recorder's memory card back into my pocket in Damien's study, Miranda appeared unexpectedly in the hallway. She stared at me with ice-cold eyes. "What were you doing in there, Selena?" I swallowed and forced a calm voice. "I was looking for an old music book. Father left so many. I hadn't brought them all into the room yet." Miranda smiled, but the smile made my skin crawl. "Yes. Remember to take care of your health. You've been so forgetful lately, haven't you?" I nodded and feigned embarrassment. But the moment I entered the bedroom, my whole body shook. One slip, and they would discover everything. That night I opened my journal and wrote with trembling hands. "They are tightening the siege. But I am collecting the pieces. Every pill I hide, every recording, every line in the bank statement, they are the strings of a taut instrument. When the counterpoint sounds, it will shake their whole stage." I closed the book and looked up at the ceiling. In the silence, the wind drummed at the window like a steady, urgent beat. I knew the contest had only reached its most tense movement. I had never imagined the day would come when I would have to play the part of a madwoman. But it was the only path. If Damien and Miranda believed I was rapidly spiraling, they would let down their guard. In that gap, I could drive in the blade of my counterattack. Ethan did not agree at first. When I told him my plan, he looked at me as if I were a reckless person poised to leap off a cliff. "Selena, pretending to be mad means you must step fully into the role they want to pin on you. Are you sure you can endure that? Once the story spreads, your reputation, your friends, everything could crumble." I gave a bitter smile. Reputation. They took that from me long ago. The only thing I need is the truth. And if I must feign madness to expose them, I'm willing. He was silent, then finally nodded. "Okay, but I will be watching you constantly. And if things get out of control, I'll pull you out." The plan began with small details. One morning, when Damien handed me the familiar tablet, I didn't slip it away as I had before. I placed it on my tongue, but instead of swallowing, I held it there until I could spit it out behind the bathroom door. Still, I acted lethargic, my eyes glassy, as if shrouded in fog. At breakfast, I let my hand fumble the spoon twice, then muttered senseless phrases. Miranda glanced over, satisfaction flashing across her face. "She's getting worse by the day," she said to Damien, assuming I would not hear. "Soon we can proceed with the paperwork." My chest tightened. But I maintained my bewildered posture and even forced an odd laugh. The performance began to take effect. I escalated the acting every day. Once I forgot to turn off the stove and let the pot boil over. Another time, I put a sweater into the refrigerator by mistake. One afternoon, I deliberately stood on the balcony and murmured aloud to my father, my voice quavering. my hands reaching out as if greeting an invisible figure. Damien rushed to me, wrapped his arm around my shoulders, pretending to soothe me. Yet in his eyes, I saw a streak of triumph. I knew then I had pushed precisely the right sore spot. After that, overheard him on the phone again. She can't control her behavior anymore. Prepare the paperwork. Dr. Whitaker will sign easily. I bit down hard on my lip to keep from crying out. They were accelerating their timetable, and that was exactly what I wanted. While I simulated madness, Ethan worked tirelessly to gather evidence. He secretly planted a tiny camera in a potted plant in the living room. And I photographed papers whenever Damien let his guard down. Piece by piece, the puzzle emerged. Transfer agreements, internal memoranda. Even cash receipts paid to Dr. Whitaker. Selena, the more I see. The colder I get, Ethan said, the next time we met at our usual cafe. They don't just want money. They want to destroy your identity so completely that no one will believe you were ever sound. I nodded, my hand trembling as I lifted my cup of tea. That's why I'll turn my madness into a double-edged sword. I'll let them think I'm weak. But in truth, I will be leading them into the trap. A golden opportunity came one Saturday evening. Miranda invited a few close friends for dinner. I knew she wanted them to witness my instability, to serve as potential witnesses later. I wore a simple white dress and left my hair loosely tied to make my face look hollower. As the guests were seated, I suddenly stood, lifted my wineglass, and laughed loudly. My father would be so proud tonight, I said, eyes misty as if I were sleepwalking. He's sitting right there. Can't you see him? I pointed to the empty chair at the corner of the table. The room froze. One guest murmured, "Oh my, how sad." Miranda pretended to dab her eyes, but I could see the delight at the corner of her mouth. Damien slid his arm around me and whispered tenderly, "Sit down, Selena. Don't make a scene." I leaned my head against his chest and let out a small, plaintive moan, so they would see me as a woman breaking apart. But inside, I smiled. Everything was within the frame of the camera Ethan had hidden in the handbag I carried. Pitying words, confirming looks, evidence that they had staged my supposed mental illness. That night, after the guests left, Miranda whispered to Damien in the living room. I pretended to be asleep but could still hear. Now, no one will suspect. We only need another week to finalize the paperwork. Whitaker already has the documents ready. Damien answered, his voice low but barely disguising excitement. Good. Once Selena is taken away, all the assets will be in our hands. I lay still and clenched my eyes shut, yet inside, a storm churned. They believed I was fully caught in their net. But in reality, each strand of that net was becoming the evidence to strangle them. The next morning, when Damien offered me the familiar glass of water, his gaze soft and fake with affection, I gave a faint smile and swallowed the pill. This time I swallowed it for real, so he would remain unsuspecting. A numbness crept gradually through my body, but I reminded myself, just a few more days, Selena. A few more days and the truth will explode like a bomb. I looked at my husband's face, the man who once vowed to love me. Now a predator, and whispered inwardly, "Enjoy it while you can, Damien. Because when the curtain falls, the one who will be mad is not me, but you." I had thought that once Damien and Miranda were taken away by the police, everything would be over. But truth rarely wraps itself up so neatly. The deeper I dug, the more I realized they were not merely two conspirators hiding in the shadows. They were a single link in a dense network of power, money, and deliberate cover. The next morning, I woke to my phone ringing incessantly. The story had exploded online. Attorney Damien Cole and his mother arrested on allegations of asset fraud. Alongside it were photos of me Hello Cheek. Glassy-eyed snapped while I was still pretending to be mad. the comment threads filled with suspicion. She probably made this up to avoid a psychiatric hospital. Daughter-in-law accuses husband and mother-in-law sounds more like a movie than reality. I sat motionless in front of the screen, my chest tightening. I had accepted the role of the madwoman to gather proof. I had not expected that the role would now turn and gnaw at me. That afternoon, Ethan arrived with a thick dossier. "Bad news," he said, his face grave. "Damien's lawyers have filed complaints. They claim all the audio evidence is doctored and that you're a mentally ill fabricator." I let out a brittle laugh that trembled. "They're still performing that play, even after being caught." Ethan nodded. "Selena, they have wide connections. Miranda sat on charity boards. Damien deals with powerful clients. They'll use everything they can to sway public opinion." I put my head in my hands, feeling the room tilt. This was the price of truth. Not everyone wanted to hear it. And it was not always believed. That night, a plain envelope slid under my door. Inside was a single sheet of paper scrawled with a handwritten note. "Be careful. There are things you do not want to know. If you continue, the next disappearance won't be Damien or Miranda." A chill ran down my spine. My hands shook as I unfolded the scrap. Someone else, some third party, was watching and warning me. The next day, Ethan and I met in a dimly lit diner, a place where low light made our conversation less conspicuous. I placed the note on the table. "Do you see this?" "There's someone else involved," I said. Ethan frowned and tapped the tabletop with his fingers. "Could be an accomplice, or someone else who stands to gain from this fortune. Selena, you must be extremely careful." I looked at him, my voice breaking. "Careful for what?" "They turned me into a madwoman. Now the public believes it. I have two choices left: stay silent and survive, or risk everything to drag it all into the light." Ethan was silent for a long time, then said, "Then we risk it. But we must be prepared to pay the price." The first price arrived sooner than I expected. The art studio where I've worked for years emailed me. "We regret to inform you that your contract will be suspended due to the current legal situation." I sat stunned in front of the screen. My career, my last remaining pride, was being swept away. Damien had anticipated this. Once one's reputation is gone, one's words turn to the desperate cries of someone nobody trusts. I called Ethan, my voice hoarse. "They've taken everything. What else is there to lose?" He answered firmly, "There is still something, the truth. And there is still justice." A week later, I had to testify in a preliminary hearing. In the courtroom, Damien wore a tailored suit and maintained a composed exterior, his eyes glittering with arrogance. Miranda sat beside him, feigning frailty and clutching a tissue with trembling hands. Their lawyer stood and spoke in a clipped, confident tone. "Your Honor, the plaintiff, Ms. Selena, suffers from severe mental instability. The audio recordings presented are fabricated edits. This is a desperate attempt to destroy my client's reputations." I rose, trying to steady my voice. "Your Honor, I possess financial records and witness statements. They can bribe the press, but they cannot change the facts." Damien gave a thin, mocking smile as his gaze cut across to me like a blade. "Selena, you are destroying yourself," he said. The hearing concluded without a resolution. Yet within me a new determination flared. If I wanted to pull down the entire trap, I had to go further. I had to expose the invisible hands that had steadied Damien and Miranda. That night, I called Ethan. "Prepare yourself. I don't just want to clear my name. I want to strip bare the entire network that helped them." He was quiet for a moment, then replied, "If you're ready to pay the ultimate price, I will go with you to the end." I nodded, even though he couldn't see it. Outside the window, the city glittered with lights, but inside me there was a darkness the color of secrets yet to be revealed. I also felt the cost in other ways. Friends who had once offered sympathetic notes now kept their distance, fearful of being tainted. The scholarship fund my father had set up, something I had sworn to protect, was now a headline and a battlefield. Donors called with cautious questions. Trustees asked awkward, pointed questions that implied suspicion, and yet the push to expose the truth had an unexpected effect as well. A small number of people reached out privately, an accountant who had noticed odd transfers years earlier, a former assistant to Damien who muttered apologies and offered a box of documents, a volunteer from one of Miranda's boards who confessed to witnessing conversations she had rationalized away at the time, piece by piece. The bigger picture emerged: connections winding through charities, shell companies, and complicit professionals who had turned a blind eye in exchange for favors. The discovery was horrifying, but also clarifying. The price of truth, I realized, would be high relationships, security, comfort, but the alternative was to let my life be consumed by a lie. Still, the threats from that anonymous note haunted me. Whoever had slid that paper under my door had shown capacity and intent. We weren't merely fighting the people in our house. We were contending with a mechanism that could protect them. A few nights later, as I stayed up compiling witness statements and matching bank transfers, I heard a soft sound at my window. I froze. For a second, panic flooded through me, the old terror that someone stood outside waiting to take me. I rose, peered out, and saw only the empty street glistening with rain. The city looked indifferent. I returned to my desk and kept working. The price of truth was a ledger of losses I had to accept. But with each confirmed transfer, each corroborating witness, the ledger began to tilt the other way. When dawn came, exhaustion weighed on me, but a fierce resolve steadied my hands. The road ahead would not be neat. It would be bloody and costly and long. But I could no longer imagine living in the false peace they had arranged for me. I folded the slip of paper I had received and placed it into my journal between the pages where I kept dates and records. It belonged there, part of the score I was piecing together to call them to account. And I understood, with uncomfortable clarity, that to win this war, I would have to be willing to pay more than I had ever thought possible. The deeper I dug, the more I realized Damien and Miranda were only the tip of the iceberg. The anonymous threats, the fierce counterattacks by their lawyers. The way the news had been bent and twisted dull pointed to a hidden force behind them. Ethan arrived with a new dossier, his face taut with tension. Selena, we followed the money from Damien's shell company. And you know what? It leads to another name. My hands trembled as I took the papers. The name printed in bold across the first page stopped me cold. Marcus Holloway, CEO of a major real estate investment group. A man who had sat beside my father at countless charity dinners. I remembered him clearly, always appearing with a genial smile and an overly familiar hand on my father's shoulder. No way, I whispered. My father trusted him. Ethan nodded, his eyes hard. That's exactly why he could act. The illegal transfers from your inheritance fund were routed to companies connected to him. Damien was doing the dirty work. That night, I sat alone in the dark apartment, staring at an old photograph of my father with Marcus. They stood side by side, raising glasses to celebrate a philanthropic project. I remember Dad saying, "Marcus is a man you can trust. If you ever need help, go to him." Tears slipped down my face. The man my father trusted had been stabbing me in the back. The next day, Ethan and I sketched out the plan. "We can't storm Marcus head-on," he said. "He has power, allies, and the ability to crumble this case if we don't have airtight evidence. We need to make him reveal himself." I gripped the edge of the table. If Damien and Miranda are the small trap, Marcus is the real snake. I will force him out into the open. The opportunity arrived unexpectedly. I received an invitation to a private mediation from Damien's lawyer. The meeting was set in a luxurious hotel. I knew immediately it was a trap yet. It could also be an opportunity. Ethan watched me closely as I put on my coat. "Selena, are you sure you want to face this alone? This could be dangerous," I answered calmly, because fear was a luxury I could not afford. If Marcus is truly behind this, he will show up. I must look him in the eye. The meeting room gleamed under warm lights. Miranda sat at the far corner, looking aged and weary. Damien looked composed, but his face was tight. As I took my seat, a deep voice came from behind me. "Selena, long time no see." I turned. Marcus Holloway entered, cane in hand. His smile as genteel as my memory, but his eyes cold as ice. My throat closed. "My father believed in you." Marcus inclined his head with a mild smile and sat. His voice was measured. "He did. I did a lot for your family. But times change. Large estates require firm hands to manage them." My jaw clenched. By manipulating documents, forging signatures, and trying to lock me away in a psychiatric hospital. Marcus's smile thinned. "Don't be melodramatic." Damien and Miranda were overeager, but the objective was justified, to protect the assets from an unstable woman. Anger flared inside me, but I kept my composure. I knew every word he spoke was being secretly recorded. Ethan had fitted a tiny device in the watch he lent me for the meeting. The conversation ended with no agreement. Marcus rising to leave with a parting line that chilled me. "Think carefully, Selena. You could live peacefully with a modest portion of the estate. Or you could lose everything by stubbornly fighting me." Damien shot me a look of hatred, and Miranda bowed her head, as though she understood their game had reached a level beyond their control. Outside the hotel, Ethan pulled me into the car as soon as I stepped out. "You were brilliant," he said. "The recording is clear." Marcus admitted he was pulling the strings. I rested my forehead on the cool window, cares leaking out before I could stop them. "Do you know what it felt like to hear my father's friend confess to making me pray?" I wanted to scream at him and fling the truth in his face. Ethan gripped my hand and said with quiet certainty, "We're not done. Now we have the full picture. Damien and Miranda were pawns. Marcus is the mastermind. The next step is to make the world see that." I knew exposing Marcus meant striking at a gigantic, entrenched force. He would not surrender quietly. And in the dark, I could feel other hands poised to silence me. That night, I wrote in my journal, "When we unmask the hand that hides in the shadows, we will see the darkness behind it. This road has no turning back. Either I drag everything into the light, or I drown with the secrets." The wind picked up, rattling the curtains. I understood that the final confrontation had begun. Now what was at stake was no longer just my life, my family's truth. My father's legacy and the very identity of those I had believed in would be wagered. News about Marcus Holloway didn't break right away. He still wore the mask of a respected businessman, gracing newspapers with speeches on community responsibility. Meanwhile, I bore the brunt of the storm, accused of betraying my husband, of fabricating lies, of being mentally unstable. Some nights I lay in my small apartment wondering if I had waded into a battle far beyond what one person could endure. But then I remembered my father's warm, steady voice in memory. "If the truth is yours, don't fear the dark." And I knew I could not retreat. Ethan and I worked relentlessly for weeks. We gathered every recording of Marcus, every financial trail, even the anonymous threats. Sophia, young prosecutor and an old friend of Ethan's, agreed to take the case. She said, "We're not just fighting a man. This is a battle against an entire system of concealment. But if we succeed, it will set a precedent." Inside me rose both fear and resolve. I was no longer fighting only for myself. I was fighting for everyone who had ever been manipulated, silenced, and branded crazy so their rights could be stolen. The trial opened under the city's full glare. The courtroom was packed. Journalists thronged the hallway. As I walked in, stares pressed down on me, some pitying, some doubtful, some outright scornful. I lifted my chin and inhaled deeply. This was the final stage. Damien sat on one side, his face gaunt but still curled in arrogant smiles. Miranda was quiet, her hands knotted together, a frail shadow of herself. Marcus arrived last, leaning on a polished cane, exuding the calm of a man accustomed to command. When the prosecutor presented the evidence, Damien lashed out. "Everything is my wife's invention. She has a psychological history. The court can verify it." I rose, my voice trembling but clear. Yes, I pretended to be insane, but I did it to survive. I have evidence of them plotting to lock me away, forging my signature, siphoning off assets. This is not delusion. This is conspiracy. Then Marcus's voice rang through the speakers. Low and steady, Damien and Miranda were overeager. But the goal was justified, protecting the estate from an unstable woman. The courtroom rippled with shock. Marcus frowned, but forced a smile. A recording can be fabricated. I never said those words in that context. Sophia countered with bank statements, showing millions siphoned from my fund into companies tied to Marcus. Piece by piece, the puzzle locked into place. The trial stretched for days, and I lived as if walking a tightrope. By day, I stood firm before justice. By night, I sat alone, asking whether I could rise if we lost. Ethan was always there, his hand clasping mine. "Selena, you're not alone anymore. We'll get through this." At times, I caught Miranda's eyes. They no longer held pride, only exhaustion. She looked away from me, as though she knew she had chosen the wrong path, but lacked the courage to turn back. For a fleeting moment, I felt pity, but then remembered the pills she had forced on me. And my heart cooled daunt on Judgment Day. Heavy rain lashed the windows. My hands shook so hard I could barely hold a tissue. The judge read each line aloud. Damien Cole, guilty of financial fraud, forgery of legal documents, conspiracy to abuse guardianship power to 25 years imprisonment. Miranda Cole, accomplice, aiding in falsified records and concealment to 15 years imprisonment. Marcus Holloway, mastermind, large-scale financial fraud, legal manipulation, and witness intimidation, life imprisonment. Applause and gasps erupted. I sat still, tears spilling not from triumph, but because at last the darkness had been named. Yet every victory has its cost. My reputation would not heal overnight. Some still called me the woman who faked madness, and certain tabloids spun headlines painting me as greedy and scheming. But for me, the greater victory was that truth had been dragged into the light. That night I returned to my apartment and stepped onto the balcony. The rain had stopped. The city shimmered under lights. Ethan arrived and placed an envelope in my hand. "The court restored all your assets. But more importantly, Selena, you've restored yourself." I opened it. Inside lay the official restoration of ownership, the very thing they had tried so desperately to steal. I smiled through tears. I just wish my father could see this moment, that his daughter did not bend. Ethan's grip tightened around my hand. "He did see it in the way you stood today." Months later, I founded a charity in my father's name, dedicated to helping women suffering from psychological and financial abuse. At the opening, I stood before the crowd and told my story without embellishment, without hiding. I spoke of the pills, of the public suspicion, of the suffocating isolation. And I spoke of the strength in rising, in finding allies, in believing yourself. When the applause thundered, I knew I had fully stepped out of the shadows. Damien, Miranda, and Marcus had lost everything. I had regained the most precious thing, the truth, and a future. Asterisk, Thank you for listening to this story with Snail Story. If you feel touched by this journey, please hit like, subscribe, and leave a comment sharing your thoughts. Your support is what inspires us to bring you more heartfelt and healing stories.